Hello, everybody, and welcome to Demon Folklorist. I am the Demon Folklorist, Victoria J. I want to do a shout out to my sister who just graduated with her bachelor's in psychology with honors. Yay, Lex! We're all so proud of you. She's going to do great things in the psych community. You watch. Today we're going to be talking about the Roland demon case. So as a demonic folklorist, what I do generally is take a look at these cases because they've been steeped in public folklore and people's fears. They start to project those things in the books they write about it, in the things that come out about the case. Roland, that is actually not his name. He was a child when this happened. When I say that he was a child, he was about 14. Everybody who's around that age is a child to me, so there you go. His real name is Ronald Edwin Hunkeler, and Troy Taylor got permission to publish his name after he died. In 2020, he was born in 1935, and he was actually a NASA engineer, which to me goes to show that even when you have demonic experiences, as horrifying as they are, it doesn't brand you or follow you through your entire life. It can, and there are side effects that have been said to follow you throughout your life. Like some people have aging effects when they're near demons that do not go away ever. So maybe you're 30, but you look like you're 50, that sort of thing. This was an awful case, but Ronald had a normal life. An experience with a demon does not define you, though it does change you. I didn't have a demonic experience, but I was possessed for a few days of my life, and it changed me. But arguably, I think it made me stronger as a person because I now know what it takes to break me down for spirit possession. Also, when it came to Ronnie's childhood, he spent a lot of time with adults, mostly his Aunt Tilly. At first, the family reported hearing scratching and dripping sounds in the house, and they couldn't identify where it was coming from. This happened over and over and over again throughout the course of this case. Ronnie claimed he could hear somebody walking in his room at night when he was trying to sleep. There were scratch marks found on his mattress in the morning, and eventually, unfortunately, those scratch marks began to appear on his body. Roland heard footsteps in his room when he was trying to sleep. Ronnie heard footsteps in his room while he was trying to sleep. He experienced strange noises, furniture moving of its own accord, ordinary objects such as vases flying by or levitating just because he was nearby. They observed shaking bed, flying objects, the boy speaking in a guttural voice, exhibiting an aversion to anything sacred. He also had the word Lewis scratched in his stomach. One of the priests, Halloran, stated that during this scene, the words such as evil and hell, they were putting crucifixes under the young boy's pillow, and they would leave him to rest, and the family returned to find furniture flipped over and the crucifix moved to the edge of the bed. While the exorcisms were performed, Roland would vomit, urinate, spit, speak in Latin, which he did not know, and he would also take on a very deep, adult-sounding voice that nobody recognized. It does often take a few exorcisms to fully clear a demonic presence, or several of them, which can also happen. Sometimes it's not just one demon inhabiting a body, sometimes it is several. It isn't as common, though, for a demon to fully possess children or teenagers. It does happen. But to me, it almost seems like because they're such an easy target, there's no challenge. Usually, attacks are made on children to make the intended adult victim feel very powerless and fearful for their children. The Exorcist is actually the movie that this case influenced directly. It is an impressive movie, mostly for the prosthetics and the makeup and for Linda Blair's performance, but it is not the most accurate movie in the world. I mostly had a problem with the fact that the demon was weirdly British sounding. It would have to be another post evaluating that movie to mine for facts. Other things that happened was that they heard marching feet and beat of drums, and there would be scratching inside the ceilings and walls, footsteps, rattling of dishes and cabinets. Ronald's bed began to shake at night. Blankets and sheets would be pulled off if he hung onto them. He was pulled with them, and he would often fall to the floor because his bed was shaking too much. Now, there was no evidence that his Aunt Tilly was a spiritualist or even interested in the occult. There's also no evidence that Ronnie ever had a Ouija board. Sometimes the answer is just not that simple. There's always a reason for demonic interference, and it can usually be traced. But that seems like a little bit of satanic panic for people to just be like, oh, well, it had to be a Ouija board. So whenever I talk about like Ouija boards or things in the occult, if you don't know what you're doing, it's dangerous. Just like if you pick up a chainsaw and you don't know what you're doing, that is dangerous. So there are ways to safely use Ouija boards. I don't personally recommend it, only because I have no interest in talking to spirits. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to tell you not to do it. It's just that you need to be safe about it and you need to do your research. Now, the other thing that people get wrong about demons is that there isn't always a demon on the other end of a Ouija board. They're not just like sitting there waiting in the wings for little Bobby to use a Ouija board for the first time. That isn't how it works. You could contact a spirit. You could even contact a spirit who is recently dead. It really depends on what you believe, but no, demons are really not that common. And people need to stop being as afraid of them as they are, because all it's doing is propagating fear, right? And satanic panic is all about that. It started in the 80s, like people were like, oh my gosh, ritual satanic abuse. This is happening. This is a thing across America. And the FBI got involved. They could not find evidence that this was actually happening. Now, it's not to say there isn't such a thing as ritual abuse, but it's probably not Satanists who are doing this. Most Satanists, pagans, witches, all of these things that get clumped together in the occult, they are some of the nicest people I've ever met, who are so willing to help and get involved, and you should not be afraid of them because media told you to be, because Christianity told you to be. Like, it's just not okay. People have gone to jail because of satanic panic. So that's my PSA for today. Anyway, other phenomena that would happen, there was a picture of Christ that shook, scratching into the floorboards, and there was a sound of squeaky shoes in Ronnie's room. There was knocking in response to a question. All of these statements are a little bit disputed because they thought it was Tilly. They were convinced of it. But eventually, this stopped being just in Ronnie's home because there was an incident at school. Ronnie's chair shook, vibrated, it was rattling and knocking, moving across the floor of its own accord. And at home, he had like books fly out of the bookcase and they would land at his feet. A coat flew off the hanger to drape on his shoulder. Items on the kitchen counter would fly towards him. Table was lifted by one end and then flipped over completely by an invisible force. Clothing he'd laid out was found on the floor while he was reading. He was thrown out of a chair that had lifted up by itself by its back legs, so it like slid him on the floor. A vase levitated and then was thrown across the room, breaking against the wall. And all of these things that I'm listing are things that come up in other narratives. This is all in my classification system. We have, it seems like, a lot of furniture-focused phenomena at this moment in time. Ronnie himself also started to become very affected by this phenomena. He became morose and depressed, insular. He didn't want to talk with other people, and eventually started hearing him cursing in his sleep. As I was reading this, it sounds a little like PK phenomena that's emitting from Ronnie himself. Now, PK phenomena is, I believe, psychokinetic phenomena, and this is normally with girls who are going through puberty, but not always. And it is poltergeist phenomena, and it is emitting from a person. I would say, like, I would even go as far as to say a psychic person, maybe someone who doesn't know they're psychic, but I can't prove that. I honestly don't know very much about poltergeists, but I know that PK phenomena is normally coming from a person, and very unconsciously. A lot of the time they don't know what they're doing. And it abates at some point, maybe once they've fully grown out of that puberty stage. So, back to the case, Ronnie was being scratched, and sometimes it looks like a cat claws. It would be on his arms, his legs, his chest, and some appeared to be letters. He sensed a cross in the room that he should not have been able to sense because he could not see it, and that is something that is evaluated during possession cases. Do they have knowledge of things they could not possibly have knowledge of? Do they seem to be allergic to Christian iconography? Christian iconography, I've noticed, is mostly a demon thing. Other spirits don't seem to have as much of a problem with it. Now, what that means is something. Honestly, we don't know what it means. It could be that they believe in God. It could be that God is real. Or it could be something about the way these things are made. We are doing our best, but for whatever reason, this is something that we can trace to demons. Demons don't like them, period. But when you go into like human spirits, for instance, they don't feel the same way at all. Anyway, off on another tangent. Okay, back to the case. When Ronnie had been institutionalized, there was a tray that a nurse had that flew out of her hands and smashed against the wall. His bed rolled across the room on its own, also slammed into the wall. It shook and threw him off. He would thrash and jerk on the bed. In response to holy water, he would swear in Aramaic, which is an ancient language that he could not possibly have known. So here's a fun little story. Gosh, another branching. I'm sorry. It's like this is just a really interesting case. But some fun lore about my family. We had one of our worst psychic experiences around the St. Louis area. We had a spirit that had been bothering me in California that got much stronger in the St. Louis area. We always are like, gateway to the west, gateway to something. And my aunt was also scratched by a nearby crucifix that was allegedly used in the Roland Doe case. They had it in a city museum, and I don't believe we went to go look at it specifically, but we learned it was there, and she was like, yeah, I had been scratched by something, and she couldn't figure out where it come from. So, fun little story. Back to his case. He had started to have branding happen in his skin. One thing that was said was no school. That was scratched into his chest. No also appeared on his wrists and his legs. And again, we keep seeing kind of the same bed phenomena. And that honestly kind of makes me think that this wasn't a particularly strong demon at this point in time, because it didn't seem like as this went on, the phenomena changed or got much worse. It just seemed like the same thing kind of over and over again. Now, I'll come back to that statement because it does get worse. And I think it's because another demon, a much higher level demon got involved. Because, like, it's like one demon, two, let's bring our friends and fuck with you. All right, so other things that happened, Ronnie wouldn't really be able to sleep. And one of the ways that demons really break people down is through lack of sleep, because it's one of our basic needs. Through nightmares or infestation tactics where they do phenomena that makes it impossible to fall asleep or afraid to fall asleep, it weakens us. And I have actually personally had this happen. It is the absolute worst. And past a certain point, you do start to see things and hear things. Your body needs sleep so much that it cannot regulate you if you don't. Once again, Ronnie had this personality change happen to him. This happens a lot in oppression phenomena. They became hostile, violent, very disagreeable. He threatened to run away. I think this denotes extreme oppression because the constant bombardment of demonic phenomena, it changes people. It makes them start to break away from who they were and start to change into the entity that they're being tormented by. This is a quote I would like to share from Troy Taylor's book on the subject because it's just so accurate. Contrary to popular belief, possession doesn't mean that a demon enters a person's body and takes over their soul. The person's free will is never removed, only severely compromised. In possession, a person is so physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually broken down by going through the other three stages that demonic spirits can seize occasional control over that person's actions. And this is an absolutely perfect summation of how possession works. Demons don't really seem to be interested in a person's soul. They don't do anything with it. They are interested in the breakage of a person, usually to the point of death. Why they possess us, I'm not really sure. There are lots of theories, but it doesn't seem to necessarily do evil in the world, since people eventually do regain control of themselves. And demons hop in and out. They cannot stay in our bodies. They are so unlike us, it seems, that our bodies begin to break down while they're inside. So they just kind of hop out. Or the person regains their will, and then they have to leave. It seems a lot more centered, I think, this whole system of possession around fear and death. So I'm trying to demystify their encroachment, infestation, oppression tactics. If you don't know, encroachment is when they're trying to find a foothold in your world. Infestation is when they're in and they're starting to make crazy stuff happen to start to break you down. For oppression, which is when they usually single out a person and break their mind down so that possession can happen. The last stage is death, and people have died from this. If we can recognize what they are, how they operate, help can be gotten fast. So I'm trying to demystify this stuff because there's a lot of fear. As time goes on, we're going to learn new things about demons, right? But for now, I'm only trying to stick to the facts based on my research in folklore and on narratives and how they work. Another fun fact about this case, and really just in general, first-class relics in the Catholic Church are from saints. So like chips of their bone, locks of hair. But a second-class relic is something that they touched. I don't personally follow sainthood since I'm not Catholic, but I find this lore really interesting. Also, demons don't like holy things or holy people of any kind, so it would probably evince a really strong reaction from a demon in the room with either first or second class relics. One of them was thrown across the room. It was the St. Margaret Mary one. It hit a mirror but didn't break it. So whatever this was, I don't think it was strong enough to destroy a holy relic. Other relics were definitely brought in, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. There were scratches in the sign of a cross in his body that would fade after about 45 minutes. So I would definitely classify this as an illusion. It could even be a tactile illusion, meaning that Ronnie felt it. Once the evidence disappears, it just means that they were messing with your mind and they were messing with what we see. Now, during the exorcism, Ronnie would howl in pain from the prayer to cast out the unclean spirit. There were 3 welts that would be on his stomach along with new scratches, and it seemed from their point of view like something was trying to crawl its way out. Big bloody slices would appear on his body like an engraving all over his body. His hands were seen by everyone, so he was not scratching himself, and he was often confined to the bed because of the way he would lash out. There were letters that formed hell in the scratches and bled very, very heavily. And this poor kid, he would collapse soon after these exorcisms. He would have dozens and dozens of marks on him. He would thrash and tear at the pillow while he was asleep as he was being prayed over in his sleep. So it's like he was getting sleep at this point. I think they didn't really need to use the sleep tactic anymore. This thing was already in. He also told the priest of an interesting dream that he had had of a gigantic red devil that was trying to keep him imprisoned. So that's some interesting imagery. His eyes would move quickly under closed eyelids. His arms would twitch and wave chaotically. He punched Father Halloran. He punched several people. And he just had the strength of not a boy. Definitely not a kid. It was something much more powerful. A lot of the priests and different holy men that got involved, yeah, they would be injured by this because it did not want them there. It was going to do anything it can to make them leave. He also had this really gross habit of spitting mucus in everybody's faces. And this was from like several feet away. And he was also able to like hit the target each time, which is like really a talent. Like, honestly, if you think about it, like you're across the room and this kid spits at you mucus and blood and all these gross things right in your face. That's what that looks like. I'm weirdly impressed by that because it's like, God, what a gross thing to do. Anyway, he also began to sing racist songs mockingly with screeching and yelling. This thing would also be in his body, kicking and scratching, hitting, gnashing its teeth and snapping like a dog. That's very common in possessions when the person stops acting like a person and like something else, like an animal, for instance. Now, this thing was able to grab Father Bodern's stole, which is like the white part, I believe. Exorcism and priesthood and all of those things in Catholicism is not my strong suit, but it is part of his uniform as a father, and he ripped it to pieces. Now, it does take power to be able to hurt religious articles like that. So maybe it was at this point that something else joined in, or maybe this demon had gained enough power to be able to do that. Because normally, them even touching it would probably be painful. At least that I've noticed. And Ronnie's body was thrown up and down. And there was an interesting moment where his back was bowed like into an arch, an impossible arch. He should not have been able to make this shape with his body. He would scream in an inhuman, high-pitched voice. I think that's the first demon. I think the deeper voice that comes like a little bit later is the more powerful one. Because the high-pitched one, my guess is that this is a much lower level demon. And that the higher level demon is the one that makes the truly dark, crazy things happen, like his body being in an arch. Ronnie also, when he was lucid, talked about this huge black stain and a figure in a black hood that he saw in his visions. Now, a hood in the spiritual realm, that denotes importance. So I think it was really right around this time that this other demon got involved. Kind of like you have demons who are like much lower level, they cause crazy stuff to happen, but it's the much bigger guys that cause high level oppression and possession. And then the other demon probably is like, hey, I'm going to come in the body too. I'm going to do this. It's been said that demons are like low-level employees and devils are the higher-level supervisors, and they do high-level oppressions. Hard to say if that's true. That information does come from Ed and Lorraine Warren, and I know how problematic they are. I'm very aware of it. They were the first ones to ever really look into this stuff. And being the first, you are going to be problematic by default, because later people are going to dissect the way you did things and be like, uh-oh. There's also the accusation that they are frauds and that they were exaggerating things for money and that there were times they didn't help these families. And, you know, I take that into account. Although in my own research, which goes way beyond what they wrote, because I read everything, every single story that claimed to be demons, and they do line up with what the Warrens reported. So when they were exaggerating, what I think happened is that they were using real things that they had seen and witnessed, but like beefing up stories, if that is indeed what they were doing. I did not know them, but I do recognize what people are saying about them and that maybe they weren't very good people. And, you know, I get it, guys. Folklore can sometimes work like that because they were the first. Maybe their stories trickled down into public folklore. But I don't think so, because a lot of the people who have demonic phenomena don't even believe in this stuff. So a lot of them don't know who Ed and Lorraine Warren are. They don't read this stuff. They're not following this kind of phenomena. So the things that they report are in their way their own. Or they believe they're like the only person this has ever happened to because they don't know any different. They haven't really investigated this world because, honestly, the supernatural's super weird and you're just like, what? In your daily life. Like, you don't think that's what's happening. Or at least most people don't. That is not the conclusion they come to in demonic cases. They're normally like, uh-oh, something's happening, and then eventually they see something, and then they're like, okay, maybe it's something supernatural, and they don't land on demon right away. Anyway, sorry guys, a lot of tangents in this one, because this case really, I feel, defined public folklore that exists about demons. So anyway, Ronnie also, when he was possessed, would have this ability to repeatedly urinate on the bed when the holy men would ask for a sign, and it was like more urine than could be produced in this boy. There was also this moment that I find interesting. So the demon launched into this beautiful rendition of the Blue Danube Waltz. I think that's how you say it anyway. It's spelled D-A-N-U-B-E. Ronnie had never heard this song before. When they tried to ask him about it and play it for him, he was like, oh, I don't know what that is. When he was, you know, himself. Ronnie had never heard this before. He'd never heard this song. He was asked about it later and he was like, I don't know what that is. This aligns with the Christian perspective of angels as being music makers, right? Singing the praises of God. And then it became a very cruel and mocking version of the old rugged cross song. And what this really tells me is that demons have the ability to make beauty. And by make, I mean imitate, since demons do not appear to have the ability to create. In any story, they seem to be bringing in phenomena, like, for instance, when you have materialization of vomit or something disgusting, I believe they're kind of like importing it from somewhere else. It's called apporting, actually. They bring it in, but they're not creating it. This is not creation. If anything, like, I think it's a possibility that they hate us because we can create. Anyway, so that's a whole different thing. I'm sorry, guys. I'm trying to focus. Anyway, so he would also, like, besides the urination, he'd be farting really, really loudly and cause the room to stink horribly. They'd open the windows because the smell made their eyes water. And this is really a hallmark of the demonic because it's never just a bad smell with them involved. It's overpowering. It makes you retch, makes your eyes water. You have to leave the room. When I've come across other cases where the stench was just kind of like unpleasant, that's normally not a demon. Demons have the power to make it disgusting to the point of you can't even be in the room anymore. Something to look out for in other cases. There was also cursing and blasphemy, and a lot of it turned very sexual and inappropriate. One time, Ronnie would be describing the men's penises and pretending to masturbate, that sort of thing. And you can expect that kind of shit from demons. They're just lovely creatures. They love to essentially make fun of humans, is what it seems like, and torment us because for some reason, and we can speculate all we like, but we don't know the reason, they hate us. They, at least this one specific type of spirit, it cannot stand us. Eventually, Ronnie was admitted to the Alexian Brothers Hospital in 1949. Whenever demonic activity would occur, Ronnie would be in a trance state, and he often didn't remember anything that he did. And this is really on par with what I have heard about demonic possessions. People don't remember what happened at all. Sometimes little bits resurface, but for the most part, the reason for that is because, or at least that I think, is that the person is not there. They go into a sort of sleep while this thing takes over their body. And I have actually personally had this happen. Now, mine was not demonic. Remember that. But I do remember at one point us both being in there, inside of me, and looking out, but not being able to do anything. I could not control what I was saying or my movements, but I was there. So I was there for part of it. It was probably a few minutes. And then I went into a very deep sleep. I did not wake for 3 days. People said I was acting normally, or as normal as they knew, that I had talked to them. I made things. I don't remember that. So when it's a full possession and they take over, you're not there anymore, if that makes sense. Ronnie eventually converted to Catholicism during this process of exorcism because they wanted to strengthen it. And this made the demon really freak out. It was very, very affected by the mention of the Archangel Gabriel. And the foulest words that Ronnie would be screaming would come after midnight. Random thing. At one point, Ronnie flew at Father Bodern, and he was able to dissolve the Bible into confetti. Again, that denotes importance in demonic hierarchy. Along with that hooded nature that we mentioned earlier, when it's a hood, it's important. Because many demons would not be able to dissolve a book whose words cause them physical pain. It's, at least from a religious perspective, it is sacred. There were also lots of random messages from the demon that the priests would ignore about future events and whatever else because it was just babble. And when Ronnie was on his way to be baptized, he began to feel sick. The static on the radio started up very loudly, even when it was turned off and even when the car was turned off. So that's another thing that happens a lot. Electrical things start to go haywire and work even when they have been turned off and unplugged, and there's no way this could be happening. When the holy water during one of the exorcisms hit Ronnie's face, it made him much angrier. He was writhing, spitting, and cursing. And this got so much worse after he converted to Catholicism. Other times, while transporting him, Ronnie growled and grabbed O'Flaherty by his neck, and dark red welts remained from where he was grabbed. I believe he was a father. A tiny splinter of the cross at Calvary that Jesus was crucified on was brought in, and somehow Ronnie knew it was there without being told. He also couldn't see it. And of course, being, demonic, this thing tried to destroy it. It got a hold of their exorcism book instead and ripped out the pages. Markings would reemerge on Ronnie's body throughout. Bright red parallel lines on his leg, an X. The last scratches oozed with blood, which then showed the number 18, and this number would repeat on his body. And Ronnie eventually started to show an awareness of what was happening to him, which is frightening for fully grown adults, let alone a teenager. This poor kid. The fact that he's starting to remember some of this, it's just terrifying. But it does also sort of indicate that maybe he was getting some of his will back, and he was able to at least be a witness, although honestly, I wouldn't want him to be a witness to this stuff. There was also this new voice that emerged, a deeper, darker one, and it said it wouldn't go until a certain word was said, which is convenient, really, because it was also probably a word that boy did not know. And it would also, play power games over Ronnie with these priests being like, I'll show you how powerful I am, by having him wake up at specific times and then go to sleep at specific times. There was also, of course, which is really common in possession cases if you really think about it, there's lots of abuse that was aimed at the priests. Comments and gestures about masturbation, nuns and priests having sex, etc. The activity seems to be aimed outward and inward. This thing would be torturing the kid, but it could also be torturing the priests too. Because this thing wants the priest to go away. Stop reading that book. Stop doing these things that make me want to leave this body. That's the whole tenet of exorcism. And this particular demon was sensitive to the insecurities of everybody there. And it fostered mistrust of each other, and embarrassing things that it should not have known were brought up. So that's a very interesting little tidbit, I think. When Ronnie was with the Alexian monks, they do remember very strange sounds and smells and noises emitting from the entire 5th floor where Ronnie was. A pediatrician also came by to examine Ronnie and could not find a medical reason to explain anything that was happening to him. There was absolutely nothing. And I always find that interesting when they bring in experts of the body and they're like, I don't know what's happening or why this is happening, because it sort of shows where science hasn't quite caught up and that there are things in this world that we do not understand. The word exit also appeared scratched on his body with an arrow pointed to his groin. There was also pain related to urination. Poor kid. And eventually there was barking and howling. He also got out of his restraints a couple times and punched at least one priest in the testicles, which, ow, that must have hurt. There's also much of the same phenomena that was repeated. Now it claimed to be the devil himself, like Satan, and just really didn't want Ronnie to receive communion. I super doubt it. I think Satan's got better things to do. I just don't think he's the devil. Maybe a devil, but not the devil. It claimed God told it to leave, but not without a struggle. His face and features would contort, as if he was someone else, which is really, really common with demonic infestation and possessions, because it's trying sort of, I'm guessing, terrify the priests by showing them a face that is deeply unlike what they're seeing, which I think is terrifying, right? There's this movie called The Haunting. It came out in 1999. It was actually the first horror movie I ever saw. And there is this scene that to this day freaks me out, even though it's CGI and it's cheap CGI. No offense, y'all, because back then they didn't really have the technology, so a lot of things look like video games. This did not, and it still weirds me out. It's a part where she's looking in the mirror and her face becomes the face of the entity tormenting her, Hugh Crane. And it's just a very weird part that I do not like as a human. Anyway, there was also a really deep chill that was talked about, and this is very, very common in demonic infestations and oppressions, because for them to manifest, it's thought that they are stealing the energy from the room, including the heat. So it's a really fairly accurate marker that this is something quite powerful, since there will be cold spots with human ghosts and other entities and that sort of thing, but when it can steal heat from an entire room and put you in a deep chill, That's how you know it's probably something more powerful. Eventually, the phenomena stopped being during the nighttime, so everything described so far was at night. Except for the incident at school, that was the only one that was during the day. Everything else that had happened so far was pretty much at night. Now it started to reach into the daytime, so it was getting much stronger. There were times that they would see that some of these scratches and things that were happening were illusions, which I think is also interesting, that demons have the power to create illusions and mess with our eyes. Because as Ronnie and Father Halloran would pray together, the marks on his body would disappear and his pain would dissipate. At one point, 6 of the Alexian monks had to strap Ronnie down. Like, 6 men had to restrain this teenage boy. And, adrenaline's a hell of a drug, but there are limits, I think, to what our adrenaline can do. A bottle of holy water was also thrown, shattered on the ceiling. The boy was given a crucifix and he threw it across the room. So once again, we just keep seeing these religious articles being abused or outright destroyed. He claimed that the religious medals that they would put around his neck were burning him. He displayed some snake-like behavior, his tongue starting to dart in and out, and his head would move like a snake. So maybe it had an affinity to this animal. I'm not really sure how the animal stuff works, gonna be honest. They seemingly either are imitating animals or maybe they were once an animal. I don't want to add crazy stuff, crazy unsubstantiated stuff to demon lore, which is complicated as it is, but we don't know, or at least I do not know for sure why they sometimes seem to imitate animals. I don't know. Anyway, there was also a new voice that was emitting from Ronnie. It claimed to be the Archangel Michael, and it ordered the demon to leave in the name of Dominus. Dominus being the word Ronnie would never say on his own. Remember, the demon was like, well, I won't leave until you say it. And it's of course, the boy didn't know it. But if this is true, Archangel Michael was like, hey, I know the word, man. And he just got rid of him. Ronnie also dreamed of the Archangel in full armor and the demons trying to attack him, but all he said was Dominus. The demons then descended into a burning cave with a metal gate that clanged shut, and it had the word spite welded to the gate. So very interesting imagery. When Ronnie awoke again, he didn't know where he was or who anyone around him was. That's really interesting because it's he had spent so much time with these people, and it's well, maybe that wasn't him, or maybe it's a blessing because he didn't remember the possession very well and he didn't carry it with him into his adult life. There was also this booming sound that echoed throughout the hospital that sounded like a cannon. And Father Bodern took this as a sign that the possession was finally over. Ronnie very dimly remembers things, like being in St. Louis in general, because they did move him after the word Louis was in there. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. They were in Maryland and they moved him to St. Louis, which I feel was a mistake, because it seemed like the activity got much stronger. And here's the thing about this case. Mental illness can explain some things about it, but not the entirety. And I think that kind of lines up with what happened to me. There were things that were yeah, you were having a psychotic break, or your anxiety had reached a crazy boiling point. That's true. But also there were things that happened that were witnessed by other people in his life, other people in my life, that have no explanation. And you can read more about that when my book comes out, because I'm working on it, guys. I think for sure this was a demonic case. It had markers that come up in other narratives. It had pretty much all of the phenomena that happened is in my system somewhere. I think this is very much a demon. And demons, I'm trying to identify them and isolate them so that they don't get mixed up with other entities, because that's a real problem right now in the paranormal. A lot of people don't understand that demons are very rare, incredibly rare actually, that most paranormal investigators who have gone into these places and tried to document phenomena have never come across a demon in their lives. Or maybe they came across one in maybe 30 years of experience. They're very rare. They're not after you, although sometimes what it seems like is that you come across them randomly, and that can happen. It's just, I don't think it should be causing the fear it is, and paranormal TV is not helping. Anybody who's running into a place shouting demon is not to be trusted, because demons boost ratings. They do, because it's a lot more interesting than to just have a regular human ghost than have, say, a demon who can do all this crazy stuff. People are going to watch if the word demon is involved. So I want you guys to be aware of that and to think about demonic phenomena as having patterns and having that you can tell. The biggest signifier, I think, is when you walk into a place and you feel a distinct presence of evil. To me, that's the easiest way to start to ascertain, okay, is this a negative supernatural experience or is this a demon? And if you're like, oh, that was kind of negative, but no, did I feel intense, malicious evil directed at me? Evolutionary standpoint, your fight or flight response. When demons are in the room with people, they just want to run. Everything inside them tells them to run because they are in danger. That's the difference. So if you had a response other than, yes, I was in the presence of evil, then it's something else. And that's the truth. At some point, I'm going to post a flow chart I made of, is it a demon or is it something else? There's a lot of misinformation out there, and I'm doing my best to make sure that the public knows what I know. Because I've studied this, I've read every single narrative that I could get my hands on. I'm still reading new narratives, and I'm trying to include as many of them in my book as possible, so that if you ever feel that you maybe have a demonic presence in your life, you can just look at my classification system and be like, oh my gosh, this happened. Oh my gosh, this happened too. That's crazy. I have future projects that will be coming out eventually where I want to isolate what happens in the presence of jinn. What happens with UFOs or UAPs, whatever they're calling them now. I'm sorry, I'm not really part of that community, but I grew up with it as UFOs. What happens when you're abducted? That sort of thing, because I'm interested in the experience. What is the experience of this particular supernatural situation? As my research grows, I'm going to keep working on this and working on different classification systems, because there are a lot of spirits out there. We have only, I feel like, hit the tip of the iceberg as far as what we know about them. But as people continue to have more experiences and we create more classification systems, I'm hoping someday there will be more demonic folklorists in the world, and we can all start to better understand this dark entity that wants to harm us and does cause harm to us when they're around. Anyway, this was a very long rambling about the Roland Doe case. I'm sorry, it did have kind of a lack of structure, but it's just because there was so much phenomena that happened in the course of these multiple exorcisms and institutionalizations and this poor kid. And I'm so happy that he got to live his life without this hanging over him, and that he was a NASA engineer and he did amazing things, and that I hope he was happy. Having a run-in with a demon is a very dark experience, and nobody deserves it. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode and enjoyed my unhinged ramblings about different types of phenomena and what this means and what all the different things that happened during this particular case, as noted by Troy Taylor, who did such an amazing job with his book. He really went in there and just tried to interview everybody he could, anybody who was there who was still alive, anybody who actually knew that person, because there's so much folklore. The more popular the case, and this was kind of the first demon case that came to the public eye, the more folklore you're going to get, the more fear is going to turn into folklore. And the way that that happens is, look at the pandemic. There was so much pandemic folklore of what you could do and what you could take to avoid getting sick. You remember that? It's because people were afraid, and understandably so. They would talk to their nurse friend, or maybe there was no nurse that they knew of, or maybe it was a friend of a friend. Remember Fofs? We talked about that in Urban Legends. So this friend of a friend knew a nurse or talked to a doctor, and they said to do this, right? The truth is, we didn't have that information, and we still kind of don't. Fear definitely promotes folklore and unfortunately spreads misinformation. So, yeah. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Demon Folklorist, and I hope you join me again. I think we're going to be talking about Jinn next time. Don't hold me to that because it depends on whatever I research the most will be the next episode. But yeah, see you guys later.